The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hi, my name is Kevin Scully. This is The People's View. I'm sitting in for Carl Seidel today. Carl was kind enough to allow me to take a couple of his shows and to invite whoever I would like to be the subject of an interview. And when he gave me that opportunity, I jumped at it. And one of the people I very much was hoping would come on the show for the interview is with me today, and his name is Jeff Creem. Jeff.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
How are you?
Pretty good.
Okay, well, from my perspective, again, I served a term up in the State House, and I became aware of you and the organization that you were so involved with, which is the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance. Yep. And I also became very aware of just what an important public service you and your group have been doing. So I came to, jokingly say I think you're one of the most important and influential people that nobody's ever heard of yet. I mean, or at least yeah. I think people in the political circles know you, but I'd really like to make sure that folks in a wider circle understand who you are and what you've been doing for us in the state of New Hampshire. Oh. So thank you very much for coming. So I'd like to start, if you don't mind, would you fill us in a little bit and give us your background as a person, your family life, how you got to New Hampshire, how you got involved in politics?
Sure. Yeah, so I moved to New Hampshire in 1992 with my wife. Actually, I moved here about a month before my wife. We actually got married and both moved down here. I moved from New York State, which was where I was actually born and kind of grew up. Went to high school there and went into the Air Force right out of high school. And after the Air Force, you fill out your dream sheet. Where do you want to go? Hawaii, California. They're like Plattsburgh, New York. so I got to go to Plattsburgh, New York, and I spent about 3.5, 4 years up in Plattsburgh, New York. Graduated, got out of the Air Force there. Went to college there. Graduated from college, and then ended up looking for a job someplace. And I actually had visited New Hampshire about maybe like a year before I graduated for a wedding. I'd never been here before, and I just came into New Hampshire. I'm like, hey, this is actually a really pretty nice place. It's it aligned with the way I was thinking about what I cared about politics and things, and so it was one of the places I was looking at, applied to, and decided to come here. In terms of politics, so I've actually been interested in politics since I was like a little kid. I was like probably a little weird little kid, when I was. I certainly remember, I certainly remember early elections, even like Nixon resigning and that kind of stuff. But I was like 6 years old or something at that time. I think the first election I really remember was the Carter Ford election, I guess. And I got really involved. I worked in my first campaign, and shortly after that, and when my father ended up running for a local, it's like an alderman race in Peekskill. And actually on the ticket with him was a young George Pataki who had never held an office before. So George was a great guy. I didn't support him for president, but it was you could actually kind of see at the time he was really interested in moving forward and going farther in politics. So that was really my first, I guess, entry into politics and seeing what happens and going out and knocking on doors and meeting people was really. I really liked that. I actually liked getting to meet the people in the town that I otherwise would never have actually got to see. So I was always into politics. When I moved to New Hampshire, I was still pretty young at that point. I was following politics. I was, voting and being involved in a couple different things. But, had young kids. There's only so much time in the day. Right. But as my kids started to get older, I started volunteering for the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance. I guess I can probably start talking about that a little bit too. So, I was looking for something to do, some way of getting involved and helping out. And I found the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, which seemed to be aligned with my views on liberty and politics. And what the organization is, founded in like 2003, so about a decade after I got here. And we really look to get involved in only state level politics. We're a nonpartisan organization, so we've endorsed Democrats and Republicans, libertarians in various races. And our primary focus is, we go in and review pretty much all the bills that go through the State House each year. Some of them get a very detailed review and careful analysis. Some of them are, as you know, there's plenty of bills that name bridges after things. Those don't take too long to look at.
Yep.
So we actually have a team of volunteers who go through, rate each bill on whether it's pro-liberty, anti-liberty, potentially neutral, and take into account things like, does it spend money? Does it raise taxes? Is it basically infringing upon people's rights?
So it is interesting from, again, my perspective. I'm not sure people understand just how much is going on up there in terms of, 900 bills a year?
Between 900 and 1,000 bills per year-ish.
So you have essentially citizen activists who decide and become state representatives.
Yep.
But we don't have a staff.
Right.
And some of these people are still working for a living.
Yep.
So the idea of being able to try to keep track of what's going on in 20 different committees, 900 bills, it's really impossible. So one of the things that I found out early on in my stay up there was that there were people and organizations that were putting out voting guides. And of course, you have to take anything with a grain of salt, but when you start looking at the voting guides that are being put out there on a regular basis, and you start saying, they think the way I do, they're looking at things the way I do, then suddenly this becomes an incredibly useful tool for the people who are trying to do the right things for New Hampshire.
Right.
Now, when I was up there, it's interesting because from my perspective, I think that the Republican Party is not quite as politically monolithic as the Democrat Party.
Yep.
So I became aware, I think at the time I was in there were 4 voting guides. The Democrats had 1. And then, if you want to call it for want of a better term, the Republicans would normally, whoever you were, could look at up to 3 different voting guides.
Right.
So there was the voting guide that was put out by the Republican leadership, and that was called the White Sheet.
Yep.
And then there was the House Republican Alliance, which tried to look at bills from their adherence to the Republican Party platform line. Right. And that was the pink sheet. Yep. It was put out. And then, of course, we had the other one. I will tell you, honestly, I used the pink sheet and your gold standard.
Well, don't tell leadership.
I think they kind of figured me out early on in terms of who I was. And I was certainly more conservative than I think the leadership we had in the first year that I was up there. But the gold standard that your organization put out was just a wonderful tool. And really, so how many people do you have behind the scenes putting something like that together?
Yeah, obviously any group has actually got people, some people are very involved in doing a lot of help, right? So it's kind of hard to nail it down. If I look at just like this year, for example, I think I have about 30 people volunteering who have reviewed more than like 5 bills, right? So now even someone who's reviewed 4 bills is valuable to the team, right? Because that's 4 bills that I or somebody else doesn't have to review. So I would say this year it's around 30. And then I would say of that 30, maybe there's 10 or maybe 12 who are, very much engaged doing, 20, 40, 50, 150 bills, that they've gone through. Right. So that first level of triage of bill review is really trying to basically find those good bills, those bad bills, get some facts behind them, do some research behind them. And then we actually have a smaller group that actually puts together the gold standard each week, which that probably varies from, between on an easy week, sometimes there are easy weeks, maybe it's only 2 or 3, to maybe up to 4 or 5 volunteers that are helping on a hard week.
So what are the 2 or 3 driving criteria that are used when looking at a bill to decide whether it's a good idea or not? Right.
So the first thing, and one thing that makes sort of our job even slightly easier than people like put out the pink sheets, we don't necessarily even provide a recommendation in every bill. First, we actually look at a bill and decide if there are liberty issues involved in it. So there'll be times when, probably if you were looking at the gold sheet and looking at the other ones, you're like, oh no, they didn't give me any recommendation, right? So if it's a very low impact bill that, it's got some pluses and some minuses, maybe maybe it spends a little bit less money, but creates a new bureaucracy or infrastructure that over the long term could grow government, right? Those are cases where I think people who are voting from a liberty perspective can maybe honestly disagree about what the long-term consequences are. So the first step really is to make sure that the bill is relatively clean with respect to, is it pro-liberty or anti-liberty? Mm-hmm. And then of course the question is, well, what does liberty mean to you? Which is always a great question. Yeah. So I think the first thing we generally look at is that the individual is sort of individuals are sort of the highest are the most important group in that, any large group itself is made up of individuals, right? So if you're basically hurting individuals, you're actually hurting groups as well. And it's important to sort of look at things both with respect to how they impact the community as well as how they impact individuals. And so one of the areas that I think comes up a lot, and I think we've spoken about this before, is like local control is actually a great example. So sometimes the state will say, well, cities and towns can or can't do certain things.
Right.
And, so at first glance, some people will say, well, the liberty position is to decentralize things down as far as possible, which I think we generally agree with. But if what the state is doing is sort of limiting local communities' ability to infringe upon the rights of the individual,
right.
That's actually a higher position is basically how we would tend to look at it. So certainly, infringements upon individual rights are a big part of it. We also obviously look at spending and taxes. I mean, I think last year in the State House, it was a pretty common phrase to hear taxation is theft, spoken yes. in the well a few times, right? So to some extent, we're certainly looking at bills with that in mind. So we're looking to see that spending is not increasing, that spending is not being done wastefully, and that, really ultimately, low taxes is a result of low spending, right? People say that a lot. So if you'll sometimes see bills that are spending money are going to increase spending money over time, and there's not really a direct correlation to a new tax there, but you recognize that over time that will result in new taxes. So we tend to be very much against that. I guess the last thing, which is sort of an area where we often disagree with many in the Republican Party, not everyone else, right, is that individuals, own themselves. They own their own bodies, right? So we would tend to support things like, legalization of marijuana, home cultivation for medical marijuana patients, those type things, right? And so that'd be a case where you would often see a difference between maybe the leadership sheet and the gold standard sheet. Actually, so
why don't you hold that up?
Right. So this is the gold standard, which you can't read. This is what we hand out. So we have volunteers that go to the State House each week, and
right.
Varies from 2 to maybe 5 people who hand this out because there's 400 reps coming in the doors, and
not everyone
wants a copy of it. I like to think it's because they've already gotten it in email and read it at home and they've really internalized it, so they don't need the copy of it. That's how I choose to view it. But really, for every bill, we go through and give a summary of this is what the bill does. Here's why you should support it, or here's why you should oppose it. And I'd like to try to have bullets that look at it both from a pragmatic perspective in terms of what will be the outcome of this, both the intended and unintended consequences, as well as sort of stepping back from a philosophical point of view. Is this a good idea at all? Is this a proper role for government to actually take? And in most cases, probably it is not.
Right.
So.
Well, I think it is so very important. Well, again, from my perspective as a conservative, is the idea that you would have certain principles that would drive decisions in the way you look at that. Because absent those, everything simply becomes a matter of expediency, which is, does it help me today?
Right.
Even though it may end up really hurting you or setting precedents that will hurt you tomorrow.
Yep. And we really try to avoid, the primary approach for evaluating the bill is the principle, right? And then the other, what will it do and how will it impact taxes and what are the long-term consequences? We like to list those as well. But that's sort of a secondary consequence for us. Now,
do you think that from my perspective, I think the influence of the organization has grown with time. Do you think that's true? I mean, how are you doing in terms of getting the word out? Are you widening the circle?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do a good job of, it's really always hard to tell, right? There's no counterfactual to say how would any particular vote have gone if we weren't there, right? So that's the first thing is realistic about. There's not really a great way to know for sure. There certainly is interest in it. People, even people who've gotten copies of it are asking for copies of the gold standard. Our membership numbers are healthy and growing, even when we've increased the membership fees a little bit. And I guess one of the best ways that I could say, do I think it's influential? Well, I think it's influential if, when the speaker is basically grabbing the gold standard and shaking his fist and telling you it's wrong and don't use it. The speaker seems to think it's influential. So, right? And ultimately, we're not looking to change 100 votes usually. There are important pieces of legislation that pass or fail by a single vote, and so. Sometimes we only have to change one vote. Sometimes we have to change 5 or 6 votes, and so really you can have a pretty large impact by changing one. Medicaid expansion in New Hampshire passed by 1 vote originally, right? Whether you like it or you hate it, that was 1 vote away from being a difference. The death penalty repeal, which is another area where we often differ with Republicans on it. We were anti-death penalty in that we don't believe that the government should have the right to kill people. Small government, limited ability to do things. Killing people is a pretty serious thing.
It's a big one.
So that was another case where the repeal of the death penalty passed. The governor vetoed it, and then we managed to override the veto by a single vote. And, and the Gold Standard was there and was telling people, look, government shouldn't be killing people, and it's quite possible that could have gone the other way if we weren't there.
Right.
So.
Now, I think the other, so that to me, from the perspective of politics, it's almost like those are your internal clients, which are the people up there and making the decisions. There's another, from my perspective, very valuable thing you do, and that is to get the word out about exactly how the different politicians are voting.
Right.
And that is your Liberty Guide.
Right.
And perhaps you could,
sure.
Hold
again,
that up.
Hold it up. Again, you don't expect to be able to read it, but we put this out each year. It's the Liberty rating. So it comes out pretty much within a couple of weeks after the last session day. And what we do is we go through the gold standard where we said, hey, it's an open book test. This is how you should be voting. There shouldn't really be any surprises here. We go through, and when there are roll call votes, which there aren't always roll call votes, we go through and we basically score each rep on, did they vote properly with respect to our recommendation. And there's a little bit more to it, and that, we put some weightings on bills, because not every bill is we don't expect people to be ideologically pure, right, to be someone who, we are aligned with. So we weight all the bills, we sum up all the votes, and we end up giving out a vote from A to F, and then for the really bad people, we have CT, which is constitutional threat. So we actually have, in Nashua, we have quite a few constitutional threats this year.
I hate to say it, but I went through there and looked at it, and out of our 27 reps, 15 of the 27 rated the constitutional threat rating, which is embarrassing from my perspective.
Now, I worry a little bit sometimes that they're grabbing a copy of the Gold Standard to figure out the opposite way of how to vote.
So it's a voting guide for them too.
Potentially it is. So that's really good. The reason we put this together is that we've gone through the process of evaluating the bills. Now we can actually go through and make sure, hold people accountable, and really lets the public know how the reps are voting. And then we actually use those scores to come up with endorsements for people who are incumbents or who have basically who have served before and who are running again. We go through and we look at what were their scores the last couple times they were there, and typically we reevaluate this from time to time to make sure we're making the right choice. But in general, we're looking for people who are B+ or higher rated for the last 2 years in order to get a endorsement. And endorsements come with our our support. Our members look at that. Even people who are not members will actually. I've had people call me up the night before an election, like, hey, do you know anything about this candidate?
Right.
And so we give them that information. Our endorsed candidates, we do have a small political action committee, so we also provide donations. And in New Hampshire, a small donation for a state rep can be a big deal, right? It can.
Oh, it can. It absolutely can.
It doesn't take tens of thousands of dollars, or at least it didn't used to cost tens of thousands of dollars to win a state rep seat.
Although it was pretty funny, that contested election that Michael Vose ended up winning, was it 50,000?
Yeah, right.
They opened up a campaign office
right.
for a
which is a little odd for a state rep seat, right? So,
but it's getting a little crazy.
It is getting a little crazy. So for the endorsed candidates, we actually can give them money, and it certainly does help some. And I would even say, we are able to get involved at the primary level as well. So none of the parties will tend to provide money during a primary because they want to remain independent during the primary season. But since we're nonpartisan, we actually are able to look at the candidates in each of the primaries and decide, is there someone worthy of an endorsement, worthy of some money? And so I think we can actually sort of, whether you're a partisan or always going to vote, if you're always going to vote Democrat, you're always going to vote Republican, and you're not really looking to change that, you can also still rely on us to make sure that the candidates that are getting through into the primary, getting through the primaries represent your views as well. So
I must tell you, I was very proud to receive the endorsement of the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance when I was running, which was great. I didn't have a 100% vote, but I always felt, and I know some people have 100% votes who I know very well and respect, so they're straight up. It's funny, I think I never got 100%, but I also felt like I was always trying to do what I thought was the right thing. And sometimes even people of goodwill can disagree on certain things. But I think, over the long haul and over a number of bills, you get to develop a sense of who a person is and how they're going to represent or not represent your interests up in Concord.
And I would say, we tend to not be, try not to hold grudges. We're all humans, right? So certainly any one issue somebody disagrees with, that tends to not be a deal breaker, right? We obviously are endorsing down to a B+, so that does give people quite a bit of wiggle room. But there are even people who are Fs and CTs, right? That if there's a particular bill
Right.
that we happen to be aligned on, we're willing to work with them in order to basically expand liberty in the state. So.
Well, I think that's a really wise way to approach it. It got drilled into my head. You know Don Gorman?
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. And I took his class to be a better legislator. And that was one of the things he just drilled into you. He said, do not make this personal.
Right.
Because the person who votes against you today may be your ally tomorrow on something that really needs to happen.
And there can be surprises, right? I mean, there are, there are some reps at least who you're not really sure how they're going to vote on an issue. And, if a personal relation, if they're on the fence, they're not really sure if a personal relationship is the thing that kind of helps pull them to the right side, then good for them and good for us, right?
Right. Well, I think it is important to stress again that the Liberty Alliance is really not a partisan group. You stick to ideals,
right? And
what you're hoping is that those ideals aren't aligned necessarily with any political party. I'm hoping that we see from my perspective, and now I'm giving personal opinion, I think the Democrat Party seems to be lurching toward the more radical left. And, I grew up in a Kennedy Catholic household. My dad was a union guy and a postal worker. And I'm very concerned about how that's happening. I'm hoping that we're going to see a group of what I would call cultural Democrats start to come back away and reject the radicalism and maybe come back to where the point we have more of a center ground of people. And we start seeing some of those scores of the Democrats going up in the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance.
Right. Like I said, we're nonpartisan, but the numbers certainly speak for themselves. But I will say, I believe all the A pluses and A's and probably B pluses and B minuses are all Republicans. But when you start looking down the list, there are Democrats who are higher rated than some Republicans.
Yeah. There's the gray area, and I'm still hoping. Unfortunately, I don't think we have any in Nashua again.
No, actually, I think like the highest rated Democrat last year, I think she was highest rated because she missed a bunch of votes. So you only lose like half credit for missing a vote. So, but I will take that as well.
I guess if they're not going to vote the way you're hoping to, it's better they're not there, right?
And then in years past, we've had some, actually even in Nashua, it was probably like a decade ago, we've had some Democrats who have done relatively well and who've gotten B plus, who actually have gotten endorsements. We've had libertarians get endorsements. I don't think recently any have ever won, but we've had people who have served who were in either the Democrat Party or Republican Party who flipped to libertarian. So we've certainly had people in all the parties who have who vote with us on some issue or one issue, and we'll certainly take that.
Now, I think your organization, although it is obviously its reason for being is the idea of trying to direct politics in the right direction in New Hampshire, you also have some other more fun things you do or social things. Perhaps you could tell people who are looking to get involved, who also might like to get involved with folks who actually can have some fun, trying to do the right thing. And
sure. Actually, before I go there, I guess one thing that well, we do focus primarily on politics. We actually have three funds within the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance. We have our political action committee, which is basically we're raising money for donations. We have our operations fund where people can donate to kind of help defray the cost of printing the gold standard and running the website and things. We also have a civic action fund, which is we're not a 501c3 charity, but we're a charity organization that has a focus on helping people in New Hampshire. And so we tend to try to find other organizations that are doing good things and doing it, generally without state money. Certainly is the best case, or even individuals like people who've had house fires and things. So we also have money that we can donate to people in those cases as well. But yeah, so sort of separate from the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance itself, we occasionally do have some member things. We have like annual picnics we do, and then sort of in the broader Liberty community itself, sort of separate from the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, there's definitely social events throughout the state. So as people move to the state, sometimes we talk about how there's often 4 or 5 events going on every single day where you could actually be going and doing something of, whether it's a social event where you're just going and having dinner and having drinks, or, about a month ago in Nashua, there was we did a Nashua Liberty surfing event in South Nashua, right? So we actually, a bunch of us, I think we ended up having about 15 or 16 people went. None of us had ever surfed before. Went down to Sky Venture in South New Hampshire down by Exit 1. They have indoor skydiving and indoor surfing. Not as young as I used to be, but I was able to get up on a surfboard and surf, and so that was a really good time. So we're actually probably going to try to go do the skydiving thing. We're not all adrenaline junkies or anything like that. Sometimes people go candle making, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's sort of all over the map. We've gone to some comedy shows. People will go down to Boston, or Fulchino Vineyards is another place where we've gone. We've gotten a group together and gone there and seen comedy shows, and so it's.
And you have a dinner, right, that you basically help organize?
That's right. So annually we have our primary fundraising dinner is right after the Liberty rating comes out. That's actually how we unveil it. So we work on the Liberty rating. Again, it's an open book test, so there shouldn't be too many surprises, but sometimes people are surprised. So we have people sometimes call it Liberty Prom because it's a relatively formal event. We get together and unveil our Liberty rating, unveil the legislator of the year, the activists of the year, people who are making a real impact on Liberty in New Hampshire. And that's the primary way we end up raising funds for the PAC and for basically donations to the candidates that we support.
Yeah, I don't know if New Hampshire is really special in that regard, but it really does seem that a small group of people who really care and are motivated can actually change the course of the ship of state.
Yeah, I like to think so. I mean, people will complain about, why doesn't this party or why doesn't some other outside organization come in and raise money? Why aren't they doing things? Well, they're not coming. It's up to us to go get things done, right? So,
right.
So when it's 2:00 in the morning and I'm working on the gold standard, I actually like to think that we're actually making a pretty big impact. And I think we are.
Yeah, well, from my perspective, again, I developed a tremendous amount of respect for the organization. I think it's so wonderful. Like you, I moved to New Hampshire.
Yeah.
I fell into love with the concept of live free and die. And
or
I think,
die.
Or die. Well, we are going to die, but let's hope we can live free for quite some time. Thank you. And I'd like to try to keep it that way. And it's just so wonderful to see how many people out there feel the same way and are actually trying to do something about that.
Did you see the Babylon Bee the other day had a story that said, Bernie Sanders comes out and he says, live free or die. Those both sound like horrible ideas.
Yeah. I posted it on my Facebook page because I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah.
So, all right, so you have a website, right? You want to tell us what?
nhliberty.org, and you can go nhliberty.org/donate if you want to donate, or join if you want to join. You can get involved with bill reviews. We typically do bill review training, but if you reach out and ask for help, I can provide some training materials. And I've sat down with people at local pubs and things and walked them through the bill review process. So definitely available to help people get involved and any way you can.
Right. So as I said, it is nonpartisan organization, but I have developed a tremendous respect for them. If you're looking to try to make a difference, I think it's a great place to start, especially if you can't live with some of the more conservative aspects of the Republican Party platform. I think the NHLA is a great place for you to go and try to do some good for the state of New Hampshire. So Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Good luck.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.